I basically started using Google Earth because of my passion for geography. You know, one of the most important things is that everything happens somewhere on the Earth, and for my purposes, it's been very important. Up there. For my purposes, it's been really important to get students out of the books that we're reading and into something that's a little bit more visual and realistic. It becomes very difficult to keep attention of students when you're doing vocab and you're talking about grammar nonstop. And sometimes, you know, we'll go through a passage and we'll read, and I'll ask them questions on what they've read, you know, like you might do in an English class. And they're so focused on the grammar and everything that I'm teaching them that has to do with Latin that they totally miss the point of what's happening. Like, how is this related to the real world? So I totally forgot to say this, but download Google Earth if you haven't already. What I'm going to do is show you guys just a couple of, I guess, what I think are interesting features of Google Earth off the bat, and show you what I've done with it and what some of the additional possibilities are. So basically, it's this huge geospatial mapping software application that Google has purchased. And most of what I end up doing is in my places, and I'll show you that, but just to give you an idea of what is readily available in Google Earth, I will take you down here, right? These options down here on layers are basically layers that are built into Google Earth that require no fancy anything, right? And there are things like borders and labels so that, you know, students can see names of countries, districts, provinces. I tend to use borders and labels, sometimes roads, depending on what comes up in our readings, especially if we're looking at, you know, if I'm taking students to see, you know, if they're taking like a physical trip to Rome, maybe they can see, okay, this road is also a real road, you know, that's a Roman road that still exists. 3D buildings, which is something that's continually being developed, and it's very, you know, it's very dynamic for urban environments like New York City. And then terrain, which is the other big one. The others do have lots of interesting functions. If you're doing science and geography and urban environments, you get a lot of stats that are built in, you know, population movements, you know, sometimes these link to National Geographic and they spotlight, you know, areas of conflict across the world. So I think, you know, the applications for Google Earth go beyond my language class. You know, I think they're applicable for history and certainly some of the sciences if you're looking at things that are happening in the world today. So what I wanted to do very quickly was turn on terrain, which is a very big feature, and borders and labels. And one of the subsets of borders and labels I tend to turn off are coastlines, because I think coastlines are pretty straightforward, and I'm not, you know, a huge geographer. It's just something that I enjoy. I usually always try to situate my students with where they are right now. I think that's always an important place to start. So for example, with my 11th graders, as a nice refresher, one of the things that we did, and I'll play one of the tours that I've created, was basically, we read the Bayeux Tapestry, which is all in Latin, and I had them pull out all of the locations that are mentioned, because King Harold, you know, he bounces around from England and he runs around, you know, Brittany and Normandy, trying to get support for the kingship, and, you know, runs into a lot of trouble. And, you know, they're reading this text and they're deciphering it from, you know, the actual imagery, and it's just sort of like, after they've done all this exhaustive work, you know, it's another challenge to get them to visualize exactly what's going on. So I tend to start off by actually making the tour, and then I ask students either to edit it, you know, sometimes I might create the tour and put a mistake or an error in there, and ask them to figure out what's going on, or what place, you know, did I miss on the stop. And Google Earth is really, really clever. You know, you create a folder from add, and you basically go to all of the places that you want to highlight. And so our Harold's Travels starts off at Bosham in the church. Right? There's a little church there. He goes and he prays and he asks for, you know, blessing on his journeys and so forth. Crosses the English Channel into France and then goes on these adventures. He gets captured and so forth. So one of the things that I tried to get the students to do is, well, let's take a look at these places, right? You know, this is 1,000 years ago, but these places still exist, you know, because everything happens somewhere. It's just in a different time. And one of the things with terrain is that Google Earth really does try to represent landscapes. It doesn't always work so well in a Latin class, but if you're doing, you know, a tour of the Grand Canyon, you know, so like Mont Saint-Michel, this one isn't showing up because I didn't turn on my 3D buildings. But, you know, once you turn on some of these layers, you get these 3D renderings of these actual spaces, you know. So if you're, you know, sometimes it's nice to do a pre-tour if you're doing something with parents, for example, you know, and you're saying these are the places we're going to. You know, it's always interesting to be able to say, well, look, this is what these spaces look like. So this was a tour that I did for my students, and I had them work on a little bit by adding 1 or 2 places in it. But I think Google Earth is much more fantastic and dynamic than that. So what I wanted to do very quickly was show you, I'm going to stop my tour here because I want to show you a couple of other things that I have done that I find very useful. So let's see. There are things called overlays, which is basically you can take a picture or a map from somewhere. Usually I just go to the internet, Google it, copy, save the image, and then insert it as an overlay into Google Earth. So for example, this is a map of the Roman Empire, right? I probably got this online, and it's an overlay to give students an idea of, you know, I can take a map that I think is appropriate and overlay it on the space, and it, you know, Google Earth tends, depending on how big the map is, it will bend it accordingly to the curvature of the Earth, so that you can give a visual representation on the actual surface of the Earth of where certain areas are. But then I can get a lot more detailed with it, right? So one of the things that I tend to do is not just I do a map of ancient Rome, this is a very detailed map that I found, because we read little stories and it says, oh, Caesar crossed the Forum. And it's like, okay, they know what the Forum is, we've done a lesson on that. You know, they know who Caesar is, but having an idea of what that is or where that is, you know, it's like, okay, I say Caesar crossed, you know, Times Square. Where is that on this map? It's a really difficult thing, you know, what does that mean? Does this place still exist, right? So I can do things like, with a map, really go down there, you know, there's more than one forum. Right, this is the main forum right here that, you know, Caesar would have crossed, right? And you know, sometimes I'll leave this up, or I can save these files to my class website, have them download and say, look, can you find the spot where Caesar was murdered? He crossed the forum, you know, he goes to the theater of Pompeii, right? Teatrum Pompeii, and there he's murdered. This is a very cluttered map, very cluttered. They have to be very detailed. Right? One of the things that you can do, for example, is you can sort of mix both of these. So I've got my overlay here, but you know, Rome is a big city. We do have 3D buildings and renderings here also in Rome. So one of the things you can do is actually turn those 3D spaces on, and you can go in a little bit, right? And I know it gets very cluttered, right? So one of the things you can do is you can increase the translucency of that overlay so that it's not, you know, it's not as bright as everything else that's actually going on. Let's see, you have to make sure you click on it, of course. And here you see everything is slightly integrated, right? You go straight down, and these are the main tools, right? This gives you your tilt. This button here gives you your tilt, and if you click on it, and it will just navigate everything north. So you can go in and tilt, and you have a mixture of your current 3D. This is not ancient Rome. This is your current 3D landscape, right? And this is the forum. You know, you can see the little F-O-R-U-M written there, right where the forum is. I don't know if any of you have been to Rome, but this is generally what the landscape looks like. And you get this. You're able to do a mixture of what's there now and what was there at one point in time. And it really does bring to life and give the students some image of not just a history, but an existence, or, you know, a temporal, spatial place that, you know, you can't really capture, even if you were to go to Rome, you know, because you're trying to mix the past with the present, and, you know, Rome is a very ancient city, but, you know, you go there and you see ruins, and you still have to activate your imagination on some level to see, you know, what was there or what wasn't there. So in addition to having complicated maps, sometimes it's very useful to simply make sure that I have the terrain on, you know, and I can go in, because one of the other things that I do with the students is, you know, they have to know things for the national Latin exam, like the 7 hills of Rome. And they look at it, I don't see any hills, right? Because there literally are hills. It's difficult to see, you know, minute elevations, you know, and, you know, a mountain is a mountain, that's pretty straightforward, but a hill is a slightly different thing.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I'm not seeing terrain on mine.
You're not seeing terrain on yours?
No.
Can this be done online, or you need to download it?
That's a very interesting question. So 2 things very quickly. You're
Like,
not
are
seeing
you doing
terrain
this
on
on the
yours.
desktop?
I am online right now. This is one of the other things about Google Earth. All of this resolution happens dynamically, so it's ideal. It's almost impossible to do it without an internet connection.
So you can turn off everything but the terrain?
You can turn off the terrain, you can turn off everything. Most of these things are added. Some of them I've created, but some of them are layers that are automatically built into Google Earth. Let me see very quickly. So I was going to say, I often do the hills of Rome because it's something that the students, they sometimes find difficult because they can't really see them on a map, and it's even difficult to see it when you go on terrain because the hills are not very tall, they're not bigger than the landscape. So something like an overlay like this allows them to see where those hills are located in relation to the rest of the city, and of course what they're, you know, what they're called, right, what their names are. Let's see very quickly. We are fast running out of time. I don't want to keep you too long. But one of the things that I wanted to do, for example, is give you guys an idea, a very quick idea of how you can create a tour. Basically, you start off by adding a folder, which is, let's see, I need to get up all of this. You go to add, you add a folder, you can call it anything you want, so I'm going to call this test tour. Right, and that should show up in your places, right, test tour down here. And what you want to do is you want to start adding locations, right? So you go to add and you go to place mark, right? And you have a lot of variety with place marks, and they're generally untitled. They can be untitled place marks. You can label them. It really depends on what the purpose of your tour is. So for example, I'll go to New York City, right, and I'll start our tour off over there, and I'll click add. And I'm going to add a place mark there. You can, however you want to design or modify your icons to suit whatever project you're working on, you can do that here in this section. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. One of the things that I do want to highlight is that you can use this option. This is my favorite option here, which is view. You can always add a description of what the location is, so if there's important information that you want your students to know, you can add it here. But the view section is where you can get really creative. And your range basically says how far away you are from the location on the Earth. The heading is 0 degrees is due north, and the tilt is the angle that you're viewing the location from. From the surface of the Earth. It can be somewhat dramatic if you do have your 3D images on, and if you take a look at New York City, for example, and you go in, you can really take a look at some of those landscapes, right? Those 3D renderings, right? So if you go in, let's see. You add a place mark here, view, right? You can specify how close you want to go in, so maybe it's 200 meters.